My friend Tom Fitton joins me now for his commentary. He, of course, is the president of Judicial Watch. And Tom, I had Greg Jarrett back in the last segment, have you? And this is reminding me of when all of us were on set on Hannity when the first impeachment hoax came down, and we did that whole special 1 hour program. And I think we're just getting the band back together because the Democrats and the leftists just will not stop this insane persecution of Donald Trump.
No, and no president, thank you, Jenna, has had to suffer through these investigations the way Trump has. There's been nothing comparable in American history. 2 impeachments, that fraudulent special counsel investigation. Now he's being targeted by a grand jury in Washington, D.C. for daring to dispute Biden's election and over documents that an interpretation of documents law at the federal level that's never been pursued before against a former president. And you've got this grand jury scam down in Georgia, again, targeting Trump for disputing Biden's election. And, there's a kind of a theme there, isn't it? A lot of election-related criminality alleged against Trump conveniently coming up at a time or metastasizing at a time when he's a candidate and when Biden's facing a tough re-election fight. And then New York, the icing on the cake is going after Trump again on so-called election crimes related to a confidentiality agreement or an extortion attempt, depending on how you read it, with this woman, Stormy Daniels, analysis of the law that's never been applied before. It doesn't even fit the facts of this case as I understand it as not a lawyer, but someone who's been around this issue for a long time. And to call it political, is not really fair to politicians. It's an abuse of power, and it's the sort of thing that ought to result in an investigation of the DA's office in New York. This isn't politics. This is something darker.
Yeah, and really, really well said. And I think you raise a great point, Tom Fitton, that this is the same election-related nonsense in every single area, that the left is treating Donald Trump completely differently than any other presidential candidate or former sitting president in American history. And there is that theme throughout all of these different investigations and witch hunts and hoaxes, as Trump characterizes them, and I think aptly. And it also is a manipulation of the law in all of these different circumstances in a way that is unprecedented. If we look at what is being alleged even out of Fulton County, if we look at what's being alleged out of the D.C. grand jury and now here out of New York, it's all a manipulation and an expression and an attempt to manipulate the law in a way that's never been done before. And it's only because his name is Donald Trump. So how do you, and you and I both know President Trump very well personally. And, we were there at throughout the administration, and he is, of course, a fighter. He loves the man in the arena. That statement, from another former president. And how do you think then this affects him going into the re-election campaign in 2024?
Well, you're asking me to put on my political analyst hat. I don't necessarily think it's as positive for Trump as some of his supporters suggest it would be. It doesn't guarantee him his election. It undermines his ability to get his message out. I'm just presuming he gets indicted, and the indictment just sits out there, right? I don't see it being resolved before he's president or before he's the next election, and it's going to be a negative on him. How could it not be anything but a negative? I just don't see it anything other than being a negative. Neutral maybe. I don't see it positive though. That's for sure.
And that breaks with some of the analysis, and I think you're right, and I agree with you on that. And I think that there's a lot of fervor
I mean,
on.
if that were the case, just think about it. If that were the case, you'd be welcoming an indictment. I mean, no
Right.
serious person thinks an indictment's a good thing for someone personally. Why would they think it would be something positive for them politically as a result? I don't understand the analysis. I understand kind of spinning it that way for political purposes, but I'm not paid to do that.
Right. And I think that that's totally fair. And unlike, people on Twitter that's suggesting, oh, this is only going to make him stronger because, they know that he's going to stand up to this. I don't see it that way either. And even though, for example, Elon Musk tweeted, this will result in Trump being reelected in a landslide. I was talking with Greg Jarrett in the previous segment about how, this is intended, I believe, to drain the war chest of President Trump. And, politically speaking, when prior to Donald Trump, if you had a candidate on any level, especially a presidential candidate that had even a cloud of a potential indictment, that was the end of their candidacy, because the American people thought, and rightly or wrongly, at least in years past, that our justice system was actually fair and that an indictment would be a legitimate expression of the conduct that was alleged to have occurred, unlike this type of wholly political persecution. And so, as you're looking at this just from a legitimacy in the law standpoint, and from the perspective of, someone who, your whole organization, Judicial Watch, is all about, making sure to hold government accountable. How does this shape the landscape of how America's process and even our perception of legitimacy and justice move forward?
Oh, I think it's very dangerous to the future of the country. It undermines our Republican form of government. And by Republican, I mean small r, in the sense that we have a constitution that's a republic. And that relies on the notion that when at the federal level, public officials exercise their authorities, they're doing it in a relatively neutral way, and obviously the same goes at the local level. And here you have, I think for the first time, at least in the modern era, kind of this brazen use of law enforcement authority to try to jail one's political opponents, namely Trump. And if that's the norm, well, our republic's done.
Yeah. And this is what is really, really scary, is that I think a lot of people in the reaction to this is rightly outrage and frustration, because I think the average person just sitting at home watching this, knowing that it's a weaponization of government to target a political opponent like they have for the last 6+ years of Donald Trump, and the average person thinks, well, what can we do about this? Because they're sitting back and saying this is totally unfair, but what is the remedy? What is the thing other than Jim Jordan has the weaponization of government committee that's investigating certain items, and he hopes, and he said on this program, that there can be legislation around that. That will take a couple of years if it even gets passed all the way through. But right now, you have an out of control DA. You have, the governor in New York that is doing nothing to not necessarily to rein in the prosecutor, but at least denounce him and denounce the actions for the unity of America. But practically speaking, when the average American looks at this and they say, this is unfair, what can we do? What's the solution?
Well, you can support Judicial Watch. You can,
as everyone should, of course.
Right. You can call your members of Congress, let them know that this is a priority for you. Call the President of the United States, let him know this is a priority for you. The politicians are responsive if the folks communicate and exercise their rights under the First Amendment, which goes beyond free speech. It includes your right to petition your government. There's a governor in New York. She's a Democratic governor. Call her up. She runs the state, practically speaking, when it comes to district attorneys. She can stop this. none of this is inevitable. The federal government, Congress, can defund the Justice Department to the degree it had a role in this process. You can bet they did. They can expose that role. They can fire those involved. I mean, there are all sorts of things under the law that can be done to restrain this. And I think this is worthy, as I said, of an investigation. Federal civil rights law prohibits anyone from messing with someone's civil rights in the exercise, certainly a candidate such as the president and as President Trump. So this is, the Justice Department is investigating people for trying to push forward so-called electors that they didn't like. This certainly has a more substantial impact and a more clear-cut violation in terms of being brazen election interference and the targeting of Trump, not because he did anything wrong, but because of his politics. And that's a crime under federal law.
It is just astounding to me that we continue to see each of these witch hunts continue just because his name is Donald Trump. And you're absolutely right that the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, really needs to come out on this. And anyone who is listening, you can share your views and you can call her office. The phone number is 518-474-8390. It's 518-474-8390. And Tom, you actually tweeted that out just a few minutes ago. So thank you for giving me that phone number to have handy.
Yeah, I was wondering how did you get it so quickly?
Yeah, well, because I follow Tom Fitton on Twitter, as everyone should, and I support Judicial Watch as well. So of course, you always give us great information. But in the last few minutes I have with you, Tom, and I always really appreciate your insights because, let's focus on then the flip side of this, which is, of course, the name Joe Biden and the Biden crime family. None of this is happening to Biden. He's not being maliciously prosecuted or persecuted just because of his identity politics.
Or even investigated as the law requires.
Right, or anything that is actually legitimately criminal. And so, I'm so frustrated with all of these leftists that are like, well, of course Biden's not being investigated because he didn't do anything. And, you're just avoiding what, Trump's actual crimes were. And they're completely assuming the salient question, which is criminal conduct. And when Biden isn't even being investigated at all, they can't possibly say that. So with the new Republican majority in the House, some investigations can occur, but this is, I think, also a really important point that not only are we investigating people as just political opponents, but we're not investigating the people who have there's substantial evidence, even just in the public domain, of actual criminal conduct.
Yeah, I kind of half joke that it's not a double standard; it's a single standard. Go after the Republicans and protect the Democrats, to be blunt. And so that's a standard. They're being consistent, which is to abuse the Justice Department to advance their political agenda, and that means protecting Biden while targeting Trump and people who support Trump. And in the case of Joe Biden, I don't know if it's terribly coincidental that we had this news break from Congress further confirming a money laundering operation. The documents, they have the receipts, as the term of art now is, showing millions of dollars being passed through a Chinese Communist front company and laundered to the benefit of the Biden family. And, you can't investigate Hunter without investigating Joe. They've been sitting on this Hunter investigation and any charges related to it for years. And by the way, the Sessions and the Barr Justice Department's responsible for that in part, that obstruction. And what a racket it is, not only what the Biden family is accused of, but the operation to protect him from the consequences of that evident illegal behavior.
And it's so mind-boggling that this happens in the United States of America. And this is what's so frustrating, is that we are operating, our justice system is operating like a banana republic. And so moving forward, In just the last 30 seconds or so I have with you, Tom Fitton, how can people support Judicial Watch, and how can people get involved to do the things that actually matter to protect this country?
Well, they can support Judicial Watch by going to our website at judicialwatch.org and making a donation, or as importantly, maybe not as importantly, but also sharing the wealth of and educational materials that we've uncovered, all the documents we're talking about on the abuse of Trump or elections and information about Biden and the vaccines and COVID and such. So it's important to support Judicial Watch. But also it's important to advocate with your friends, your family, your coworkers, and get the word out and let your elected officials know.
100%. And we are out of time. Tom Fitton, thanks so much. We'll be right back here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.